Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you. And welcome, Chairman Levine, to your chairmanship, and we're looking forward to working with you. Mr. Chairman and the members of the New York State Assembly Committee, I want to thank you for taking the time to hold this meeting in this important hearing and inviting me to testify today. My name is Dustin Czarny. I'm the Democratic Elections Commissioner from Onondaga County, New York. I also represent the New York State Elections Commissioner Association as the Democratic Caucus Chair. Previously, I have served as legislative chair for that organization and on the legislative committee for the last 4 years, which I met with many of you on different legislative proposals from our organization. Today, I intend to testify on behalf of all 62 Democratic counties, all 62 elections boards in New York State, but specifically the ones outside of New York City, and how we handle cybersecurity on a county level. I also intend to make some legislative suggestions that can improve our election day operations and help prepare against cyber security attacks. County boards deal with cybersecurity in 3 main facets: election preparation, results reporting, and voter registration. For election preparation, it is standard procedure that none of our voting machines are ever connected to the internet. Upgrades to the software of our voting machines are delivered on disks from the State Board of Elections, and each machine is individually upgraded with bipartisan supervision on each and every machine. Whenever voting machines leave our facility, whether for an election or training use, the machine software using our hash check procedure to make sure the machines operating software is intact and unaltered. Ballot templates are also prepared on a closed internal system at each county board. Those templates are then loaded onto individual SD cards for each machine. The process for burning those ballots reformats the SD card each time to ensure no stray data can interfere with the current election. The SD cards are loaded into each machine and then tested to make sure all ballot styles and combinations are effective. Totals are then zeroed out, seals are put in place, and the machines are prepped for transportation to various poll sites throughout the county. Each of these steps are once again done manually under bipartisan review with no networking of the voting machines and no machine with internet access any step of the way. These provisions slow down the process of election preparation, but it also ensures that all machines are thoroughly tested and ready while keeping them protected from potential cyber threats. Similar protections are in place for results reporting on election night in the days after the election. On election night, typical procedures are that one of the 2 SD cards that are returned in sealed pouches to central locations. Those SD cards are read, and the data compiled on computers not connected to the internet. Once the data has been compiled, the data is then transferred to a flash drive or a similar loading device and then uploaded to the individual board websites for reporting of the unofficial election night results to the public and periodically to the State Board of Elections as well. Neither the SD cards nor the machines compiling the data are, again, ever connected to the internet and are under bipartisan review as well. After the election, each machine being transported back from various poll sites are audited. The data provided on election night is compared to the data on the SD cards left in the machine under seal. Additionally, we have our standard 3% hand audit, which we've talked about a few times today. 3% of all of our machines at the end of the election day, before results come in, are selected by a random process, and those ballots are set aside as they come back to the Board of Elections, and then are hand counted by a bipartisan team of reviewers. The same process is in place for our absentee ballots once they are opened and scanned in. And once again, throughout this entire process, bipartisan supervision is the key to making sure that since there is no outside access, that all teams are working together and putting the needs of the voters first, and of course, the accuracy of the vote is utmost as part of it. Ballots are kept for 2 years, and poll books for 4 in case there is need for judicial review. Our voter registration process also has similar redundancies and protection to ensure outside access cannot manipulate our voter files. It is important to remember our registration system is decentralized in that each county has their own voter database. Only the individual county employees have access to this database and can make changes to it. the database itself is held on a separate server located in the boards of election facility in general. And typically, it's on a closed network with no internet access, and only the Board of Election employees and county IT staff will have access to it. Changes to the database must be individually keyed in and verified under bipartisan review, and mass changes to the database are not allowed, and each individual record change must be verified by the opposite party of the person who makes the change. The database itself is transmitted to the state board through a firewall device provided by them, but this is a one-way communication, and no access to the county database can be achieved through this communication. Thus, no outside interference in the local registration database. When dual registrations are detected, county employees must make the decision to purge voters, once again through a bipartisan review process. Purges of voters who are placed in inactive status and then not voting for 2 federal cycles are done through the NVRA process after the general election each year, typically late December and early January. Though I have every confidence in the process of the New York State has in place to ensure validity of our elections and protection from potential cyber attacks, there are legitimate concerns, and that's why we're here today. One of which is the resources that individuals' boards may have at their disposal. Because we fund our elections primarily within the constraints of county budgets, we have a large gap in resources from smaller counties to deal with, as opposed to larger counties which may have more budget in their county and more IT staff ready and available to help out that bipartisan board. I've talked to most of my members. They all say that they work pretty well together with their county boards and their IT staff. However, if their staff is small, they may not be able to readily address a cyber problem. New York State should look to other states, namely Colorado, for possible solutions in how to provide state funding to counties to help alleviate this issue. In Colorado, they reimburse their county based on a formula of the percentage of the ballot taken up by state-mandated propositions and state positions on the ballot. This additional funding could be used to help smaller boards with their IT process and have it directed directly to our cybersecurity or however it is done. Additionally, New York State should further reduce the ability of potential cyber attacks to affect an election by eliminating the single target of election day. And what I mean by this is that since New York State has such a reliance on election day as the only day to count votes, our window for detecting a potential problem and fixing it before votes are affected is extremely small. As you know, New York State remains in a small minority of states that does not have early voting or no excuse absentee voting. Not only would these initiatives allow for a more accessible voting process for its citizens, it could help with protection from cyber attacks. By extending the voting process to weeks before an election, the likelihood of detecting potential attacks as voting occurs during the early voting process increases. We then would not only have election day to identify our issues and be able to detect possible attacks, but changes early and have chances to correct any issues before election day ends, and thus the ability to cast ballots ends as well. Thank you very much for your time and attention to this very important matter. I know that all the elections commissioners and board employees throughout New York State on every side of the aisle are committed to a transparent and secure process to administer our solemn duty of the collection of votes as fair as manner as possible. And I'll take any questions you may have.
Thanks, Commissioner Czarny. Just a quick question. You spoke about early voting and no excuse absentee voting.
Correct.
Are you aware of any cybersecurity threats that have been used against any of the states or any of the early voting or no excuse absentee voting systems in any of the states?
I'm not aware of any attacks that reach those particulars. Obviously, we are all aware of all the attacks throughout the country and all the states, and some of those states happen to have early voting. 34 states have early voting, so the vast majority of the country does. However, I'm not aware of any attacks that were targeted directly to the early voting or no excuse absentee system.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. Buchwald.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Czarny. It's a pleasure to welcome you back to testify before this committee. I have a couple of questions. The first, I believe you were here for my questions to the State Board of Elections officials, and I inquired as to their thought process or dialogue, to the extent there has been any, on ways that the State Board of Elections, through either its investments or otherwise, can provide services to voters or to the administration of elections that in turn could save county boards of elections money, either because it could be something as straightforward as piggybacking on their contracting, or literally just relying on a state system so that the county no longer has to have the time and expense of fulfilling a particular function. And I put it forward on a voluntary basis, not something that would be required, but I would be interested in your thoughts, one, as to whether that dialogue is occurring already, and second, separate from whatever the current situation is, what you think the potentials are for progress on that front.
Certainly, the relationship with the state board and the county boards are vital to protecting our election process. And I feel like those communications come frequent, and they're always there to assist all of the counties throughout New York State. And any further resources that they can provide would be beneficial. Of course, as they pointed out, and I would like to echo their sentiments, some of our counties are very small. They have very small IT budgets, and their IT departments are handling all of their county, as opposed to just dealing with election day. And the example that they put out earlier about the one county where the jail was down, not the election board was down, and it took a couple of weeks for everything to get up. So having a support system in place to help with that, amplifying that support system that is already in place, would definitely take the burden off individual counties, especially small counties, to provide direct IT access, especially around and getting close to our election deadlines.
Well, maybe I should make the question a little more specific. Right now, New York State's Board of Elections is planning on both, is in the process of both updating their NYS voter system for voter database registration purposes, and also the candidate petition administration system, because the State Board of Elections, like county boards of elections, is a recipient of petitions for candidates so you can get onto the ballot. I wonder whether, for example, counties have been offered the opportunity to say, yes, we'd like to use that same candidate petition system so that we don't have to anymore have our own system with all any cybersecurity or other concerns, just purely because of efficiency. Like I don't have a sense yet, as a member of this committee, whether that sort of dialogue occurs, that when the state does something that overlaps with functions that county boards of elections do, whether county boards of elections are provided an opportunity to simply say, we'd like to either duplicate and therefore be efficient, because we're now going to be on the same system. When one side does a security upgrade, they'll tell the other side, so forth. Or literally say, please, State Board of Elections, if you're willing to run it, it'd be much more efficient for something to be done at the state level, or at least have the software license purchased at the state level, with the County Board of Elections being simply a user but not a separate licensee of the company, that sort of thing. I'd like to, with regards to either those specific examples or others that you're aware of, understand what sort of dialogue actually occurs, because I understand your general answer was there's frequent dialogue, but my specific question is what sort of dialogue occurs when it comes to the actual infrastructure of elections and saving taxpayers money, given that both county boards of elections and state boards of elections understandably are going to be making requests likely for increased funds. Part of our job is also to make sure that we're allocating funds as efficiently as possible.
I think, to your specific suggestion about petitions, I think many counties would be very resistant to taking that process, which is putting their local candidates on the ballot, out of our county offices. We feel a very or at least I would, as a commissioner, I would feel that that would be something that is one of our vital duties, and something that we should have direct access to and direct control over. Whether they have software solutions or at the state board that might make it easier, we would definitely look into that. And we definitely would be willing to look at those types of procedures. And, we already kind of do that with our campaign finance system, where the state board has taken over the campaign finance system and took a great deal of burden off the local states on many of our candidates. So I believe that communication does happen. They do provide the information about what they're doing and whether we can join on or not. But certain things, there's going to be more of a wish for local commissioners to have their own processes in place to control their own elections at their local level.
Sure. So, thank you for that. And Commissioner, my final question for you is, in your new role with the New York State Election Commissioners Association as Democrat Caucus Chair, I just want to inquire whether, from your vantage point, there is any sort of partisan differential when it comes to securing election systems in terms of cybersecurity issues and so forth. Is that an area that you view as totally nonpartisan, that everyone tends to agree on, or are there different angles that, say, Republican commissioners versus Democrat commissioners tend to take that this committee and the public should be sensitive to?
In terms of securing the ballot and protecting against cybersecurity, I believe that there is widespread agreement on the need to do it and the usually the ways in which that can be done. When it comes to other issues such as early voting, no excuse absentees, those can fall under more partisan lines. And whereas the Democratic caucus may be for it, Republican caucus may be against it or not willing to be for it at this time. So, but when it comes to protecting the vote and increased awareness of cybersecurity, we share a bipartisan commitment to making sure that our election procedures are transparent and secure.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Abenanti.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Mr.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you, Mr. Abenanti.
One of the things that we always talk about in guaranteeing cybersecurity is the individual hands-on protections. And you start off by talking about how the machines are programmed, and it's done by bipartisan teams.
Yes, correct.
How do I assure that group of people out there that, in fact, bipartisan means that tension that we used to have? More and more, I'm hearing from constituents on the right, on the left, and the disaffected that it's the whole system. They conspire together. They're all supporting the same candidates. Bipartisan is not a protection anymore. Is there anything else that we can say to them to say there's also these other security measures that are checking the teams?
Well, many of our audit processes are open to the public as well. Counting the absentee ballots, going through the standard audit after an election to compare our election night results to the cards in the machine. These are all open processes that people could observe our teams going through this process and seeing that this unease is maybe not justified.
Do the inspectors of elections get to do anything to check the machines, to run a sample ballot or something to see that it's set up properly or that it's functioning? I think there's more faith in the election inspectors, who are basically normal citizens who get up at 5 in the morning, get paid whatever it is, and then go home late at night, than there is in the Board of Elections staff. And I've heard this attack over and over again because, especially when you have commissioners who have been around for a while, maybe partisans, or supposed to be partisans, and then I've particularly heard it recently where you've had this upsurge on both sides, the right and the left, attacking the system. So is there some way, if we don't have it now, is there some way we can develop a system which provides to the public a better feel that these are fair elections?
I think the election inspectors already do have that ability. In fact, we rely on them as our eyes and ears on the ground on election day to let us know that there's a problem with the machine, there's a problem with the poll book, they need more supplies, that the right people are allowed access to get a ballot. We rely a great deal on our election inspectors and already do. And I think maybe the public doesn't understand how much we do already rely on, in Onondaga County, we're the fifth largest city with Syracuse in there. We have over 2,000 election inspectors out on election day, which are normal citizens, and that obviously amplifies throughout the state. So we already rely a great deal on them. They already go through procedures to make sure that the machines are sealed properly, and those seals are recorded, and that nobody can tamper with the machines, and that the ballots are being counted and the right people are being given ballots. So I believe perhaps there's an education issue that needs to be addressed, but I believe those protections you're talking about are in place.
This, 2 out of 3 questions. One
Sure.
more, second one. That second card that's in the machines,
Mm-hmm.
is that accessible by anybody, or can it only be opened when the machine gets back to the Board of Elections?
It is sealed like any other accessible portion of our machine. That seal is recorded, and if that seal, the only way to access that SD card is to break that seal.
Okay.
And then we would know that somebody broke that seal.
Okay. And the third point is, on this question of the 3% audit
Yes.
that you mentioned, this is I just want to understand how the process works outside of the city of New York. You say random. So that could mean, for example, that just by chance, you've done 3% of the smallest districts.
Sure. I mean, because at the
It's
time,
not 3% of the results, it's 3% of the machines.
3% of the polling places, which could mean even more than 3% of the ballots, and frequently does mean more than 3% of the ballots, because we're doing 3% of the machines and polling places in those, machines.
But you could have polling places, you could have 10, in Onondaga County, you could have 10 polling places that produce, 1,000 votes each. On the other hand, you could have 10 that produce a total of 200 because they're in small rural areas. And
Correct.
so if you were to audit mainly the smaller areas, you're really not auditing where the election was determined.
I think the idea behind the audit is to provide confidence over time, over multiple elections, that these machines are still counting accurately and providing a good count of their scanners. So I think it would be important to point out that New York State does not have an automatic hand recount threshold throughout New York State. New York City does, but New York State does not have that. So whereas other states do have that 0.5% threshold where an automatic hand recount is done in an election. That is not a standard procedure throughout all of New York State. So out of New York City, that does not happen. The only protection we have is the 3% audit. And as you said, it could be lower, it could be higher, it could not be affecting the races that are close. And again, there's always a judicial process where somebody could request a hand recount if they could show that.
Pretty much those have been denied, though, and
That's correct.
How, outside of the city, how do most of the results get reported? I mean, I know how it happens in Westchester. I don't know how it happens elsewhere. We heard the New York City approach
On election night?
on election night.
The individual SD cards are put in, and I'll speak for Onondaga County, but I believe this is something that is standard throughout most of the upstate counties. Individual SD cards are put into red pouches that are then sealed, and then either a dedicated runner will drive them back to the individual board facility, or the poll captain or poll president would take those back as well. Then they would be unsealed, opened, put into our compiler computers. It could be 1, 2, 3, depending on how large the county is. Those machines are not connected to the internet. that data would be then frequently uploaded on another machine that will then connect to the results software that is usually on the individual county board website. In Onondaga County, we have a third-party vendor named ResultsCaster that does it, but others do it internally. I know Monroe does it internally. We used to do it internally in Onondaga County as well. And it goes directly to their websites, and then they're labeled, of course, unofficial results, because we await the audit that happens when all the machines come back to the facility in the following 2 to 3 days after the election.
The final point on this is, what security is in place to protect the machines themselves that have that all-important last stick?
Well, they are locked down, they are sealed. Those seals are then inspected upon the return of the machine to the county board. We in Onondaga County, I'm sure this is something that is done in every county, talk to the individual polling places about locking those machines up. Nobody has access to those machines until our trucking company comes to get those and return them to the boards of elections, and then those seals are checked when they're returned. And of course, we have our hashtag procedures to check the individual operating software on there as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you very much,
Thank you
Commissioner.
very much.
Thank you.